Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Marie Todd and I'm MSP for the Highlands and Islands region. I'm absolutely delighted to be hosting this event this evening. Firstly, can I start by welcoming all of you to the Scottish Parliament. I hope you all enjoy your visit here today. I think I look around the room and I see a few familiar faces. Just I wonder, are there any people who are visiting the Parliament for the first time? Great. So you're very welcome. Try and take a little bit of time to appreciate this place. It's the most beautiful building, the most amazing building to work in. But what makes it really special is that it's our place, it's our Parliament, and it's just always fantastic to see it full of life. So, and I must make a very special mention of a little group of folk from Norway who visited me in the Parliament today. So I'm going to particularly welcome the party of 6 from the Norway European office who came to visit the Parliament today and have stayed on for this event. I'll also point out the MSPs in the room so you can all catch them later. So we have Andy Whiteman, Ash Derham and Ivan McKee, and I think Ruth Maguire is going to pop in later on as well. The first thing I want to do this evening is just start with a very small tribute to Paddy Bord, who was such a passionate advocate for local democracy. Now, I'm not going to give a big obituary to him because I met him only once, and it just seems like it was just a few weeks ago that I met him. And we chatted about this event. And being the force of nature that he was, he persuaded me to take on a young intern that very day, which I have to say, in the 5 minutes before we met, wasn't at all something I was intending to do. And it turned out to be a fantastic decision. So I just wanted to mention that. I felt I couldn't talk this evening without mentioning Paddy. As I said, I'm really pleased to be hosting this event. I think, and this is a line I've stolen from Leslie, I think that Scotland is the southern, warmer, fertile, easy part of Scandinavia. And as a Highlands and Islands representative, I find that I spend much of my life urging my colleagues to look north for ideas. We seem to be programmed eternally to look south. It's very difficult to call Scottish councils a true form of local government. We have the largest councils in all of Europe, each representing an average of 170,000 people. The European average, in contrast, much smaller, 14,000, and the sheer size of these Scottish councils hinders their ability to be representative. So a good example of that is the Highlands, where I come from. It's the largest local council in the UK with a land size of almost 26,000 kilometres. So as everybody says, it's the size of Belgium. It represents over 234,000 people. There are only 80 representatives to cover that massive region. So to put that in perspective, that's one representative for roughly every 3,000 people. The council ward where I live, Wester Ross, is the biggest, I think, in the whole of Europe. So it stretches from Kyle on the west coast up to Achiltribui and inland to Strathpeffer, where I live now. So Highland councillors have a really tough job. And for this really tough job, they get paid a part-time wage and are forced to travel very long distances in order to perform their duties. And that combination of the long travel periods, the part-time salary, and basically the nature of local government means that a majority of council representatives are older, retired men. Not that I'm knocking them, but not totally representative. So young people with other careers and other jobs are deterred from running from office because it's nearly impossible for them to live off the salary and adequately perform the role of a councillor along with their other job. Women in particular are kicked out of local councils because of their caring responsibilities. So certainly in the Highland region, being a councillor means a number of overnight stays to attend council. Scottish councillors are overwhelmingly male. So this week we had International Women's Day and we talked about this in Parliament. So Scottish councillors are overwhelmingly male. 75% of our councillors are men. and 16% of council leaders just are women. The issue of representation isn't just about the candidates, the people who are chosen to represent us. It does also include the people who vote for them. And if you look at the most recent local election, the turnout was a pretty dismal 38%. Now, that is in sharp contrast to the last national election, Scottish Parliament election, where I can't say it was great, but a slightly more solid, nearly 56% turnout. And the difference in turnout between national and local elections, no coincidence. I think it is about locality in these governments. It's the feeling of remoteness, the feeling of disconnect with the electorate. And they feel less urgent about local elections due to their sheer physical separation. I mean, if you ask people in the Highlands who their local councillor is, lots of people won't know. So something obviously needs to change. We can't have political offices which are only available to the minority in a society. We must have politicians at all levels who are representative of their communities. And that's certainly not an easy task. However, the solution of creating simply more councils is not as simple as it may seem. So this evening, we're going to be looking towards Norway and seeing what lessons we can learn. In contrast to Scotland's 32 councils, Norway has 429 councils. They have the same, there's not due to a massive difference in population, the two nations are comparable in size, but rather to a different outlook on what local government should be. Norway's heavily invested in its local councils, both in terms of power and in terms of actual money. So, despite that, recently, there's been a call to reduce the number of councils in Norway. So the question I hope we're going to explore and maybe start to answer this evening is how can we make local government both effective and affordable? And to help us with that, I'm going to hand over to Leslie Riddoch, who is well kent, I imagine, in the room, and I'm going to leave you to introduce our other speakers. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Marie. Are you hearing all right in the room? I'm not going to stand in the way of our speaker, Frode, for much longer. Just to say one obvious thing, which is that, as ever, we are both recording this and live streaming it. So when we come to questions, it's great if folk can come in and use the speaker thing, because that way the folk at home can actually still hear. And the other thing is to talk about Paddy Bort. Those of you who are regulars here will know that Paddy was a lecturer at Edinburgh University. He was a huge advocate for Nordic horizons. He had a massive interest really in the kind of joyful diversity that can exist in a region that nonetheless is kind of like-minded. And he was German. He was German, he was noisy, he was Irish, he loved folk music. He worked for a while in Ireland, that's why his name. He was Eberhard Bort. I don't know how many people in here ever called him that. He was Paddy to all of us. And as Marie has said, he had a kind of real mission to place interns from all over the world in the Scottish Parliament. But particularly, he was a backbone of Nordic Horizons and just always had enthusiasm when it was quite difficult because we're a bunch of volunteers. Paddy always had that sort of bright, it'll all work out, optimistic outlook that can only come from a country whose industrial base has not been savaged to pieces, I think. But more than that, he was a European, and that probably also comes from his background. Having grown up the age he was just 62. He was at that age that came out of the war and was determined to make sure that Germany's legacy was different. And he played a big part in making sure it was. He also helped me. The two of us co-edited this book that's come out today. And this really is a kind of a tribute to Paddy, because all the way through this, as everyone on the steering committee will know, I was screaming that this was a thing that there was, a sort of step too far, too complicated to do. We didn't have time, it wouldn't be. Paddy was right. It was easy to do, we had great contributors, and it's very timely. Because what it's looking at, it's kind of got a bit of a weird name, mixed smorgasbord. But the idea is to look at, if you look at Scotland's future in Europe, actually the Nordics have been there, seen it, and got very many different T-shirts. They've got every single conceivable relationship with Europe, and they've been developing that over the last 40 years. Do you think there might be some templates in there for us? Will I? So we held a big event in October, which some of you might have been at, and had some stonking speakers with some very interesting stories to tell, particularly about the halfway house that the EEA might offer. That's the option that Norway and Iceland have adopted rather than full EU membership. So anyway, we put this together. This is literally hot off the press today. This is it just come back from the printer. The last thing Paddy did was finish the edits. So I didn't think I would be able to do this without having a little bubble, and I've proved myself right. But if you knew Paddy, you would. So let me try to move on from this, although it's going to be hard. But just to say that if anybody does want a book, because you cannot do anything as uncouth in the Parliament as sell things, but if anybody would like one of these with its dedication to Paddy and so on, I'll be round with the books later in Hemma, which is the Swedish bar, appropriately enough, which is just round the corner that way. Now, all of that having been said, let me just move then to introduce Frode Lindtvedt, who's the Director of Local Democracy. His role is International Politics and External Affairs at KS, which is the Norwegian Association of Local and Regional Authorities. And that's the Norwegian equivalent of COSLA. And just to demonstrate that we can have matching bundles of two, we do indeed have the current president of COSLA, David O'Neill, here, who will do a kind of response to what he's hearing about Norway. The reason that we're here tonight, we've actually held 2 events already about the small is beautiful template of local government across all the Nordic countries, and Norway in particular. But I hope what we're going to hear tonight from Frode is some more of the nuts and bolts of how it can possibly work. Because people, I think, are worried about duplication, they're worried about standards being uneven, they're worried about 429 directors of education being paid 150,000 quid each. They're worried about all sorts of things that the Norwegians, I wouldn't say are not worried about, but decided very recently they would prefer to remain with the kind of truly local democracy they have. So please, would you give a very warm welcome to Frode.
Mary, Leslie, thank you for the invitation to speak on lessons from Norway on local democracy. And I see some familiar faces, so I think it's Norwegians here. And that's some of the part of it. We are so small country, we know each other, we recognize each other. So I saw it in the lobby, and I understand it's Norwegians here. So small countries, people-sized countries. It's a pleasure, also personal for me, to be in Scotland. My mother, she was an au pair in the 60s at Barbara and Kenneth Kelly in Dumfries. My best family holiday during childhood and when I was young, that was a nice week in Scotland in 1990. And in 1999, I organized a study trip. That means Barbara Kelly actually organized it to Scotland, and we had a nice visit with agriculture, with the devolution process, with landscape and castles and military tattoo, and of course a lot of music and dancing and partying all night because of the cultural festival in Edinburgh. Then the last visit I had in Scotland was in 2004 with my wife and my firstborn, and my firstborn is now a pen friend with Barbara Kelly's granddaughter. So it's a long time ago, so it's definitely time to come back to Scotland. And as Barbara Kelly always says when we meet, we have to keep up the good relationship between Scotland and Norway. So when I was invited, I had to say yes. But the topic, lessons from Norway. do we actually have some lessons from Norway, and do we actually have some pictures? Perhaps. It's on here.
Oh, that's something to do with this then. Oh, it's coming. Ah, there we go. Some.
Okay. First, a few words about KS before going to lessons from Norway. KS is the only employers association and interest organization for municipalities, counties and local public enterprises in Norway. And all of the councils and all of the counties are a member of KS. And KS, we advocate the interests of our members towards central government, parliament, labor organization and others. And we also conduct central collective negotiations on behalf of our members. And also, we act as an advisory and consultative body. And as COSLA, we are a political organization represented by delegates from the 11,000 local politicians. So, lessons from Norway. Do we have some basis for teaching others? I found one interesting report. It was the Economist Intelligence Unit's Democracy Index 2016. And there Norway is ranked as number 1. But Norway has been ranked as number 1 for the 6 last years. So perhaps we have some basis of teaching others. UK is ranked as number 16. And every one of the other Nordic countries are on the list of the top 10 in the world. Local democracy is an important part of the total Norwegian democracy, and it's crucial for building confidence in the Norwegian society. So I will argue that one of the reasons Norway is ranked high is because of the local and regional governments in Norway. I will start with the interaction between local and national government and give a short brief on the merging processes. Then I'll go into why municipalities have succeeded. And finally, I will say something about how KS as an organization has developed and supported local democracy. The relationship between the local and the national level, I call it the long tradition of love and hate, because that's how it is. But we have to start somewhere, and the point we start is the people. People is the one giving the mandate, and they give the mandate directly to the parliament, of course, but also directly to the councils and counties. Norway is a unitary state, but the local and regional delegated authority is established by parliament through legislation. But at the same time, municipalities and counties are independent elected levels of government with mandate from citizens through elections every 4 years. One point of this I will like to stress is that councils and counties are formally equal, and not so the counties is not have not the possibility to overrule the councils. They are at the same level, so we have a 2-level system in Norway: the national and the local and regional. And also, it's important to stress that the local and regional authorities are not part of the hierarchical central government. Therefore, the local and regional authorities are not subject to other state organs than parliament. And we know that, but and this is how it is. But our experience is that we have to remind often national politicians and civil servants that it's only the parliament and not the central government that can instruct the local councils and the counties. The municipality's history is also a history of Norway, from great poverty to prosperity. Local and regional governments have increasingly got broader responsibilities, and Norway is characterized by a highly decentralized problem solving. And I will argue that also in the future, innovative and inclusive societal actors at local level are the most efficient way to also meet and to solve national challenges. To meet the challenges, then we have the recent years have the process of merging. And the question is to merge or not to merge. That's been the question for the recent years in Norway. But what was the question? And the question is how to solve the problem of scale. The problem of scale is that the municipalities has over time received more responsibilities and more tasks that together exceed its capacity to solve them by themselves. And then you have to choose how to solve the problem then. And in the historical way to do it in Norway has been to cooperate between municipalities. Everybody cooperates. On the child care provision, on how to develop the society, how to deal with problems that are cross-border. So everybody is cooperating, small municipalities and large municipalities. So that has been the local answer of coping with the problem of scale. Also, another way of solution is that the national government tries to make standards and try to steer how the local and regional authorities will fix the problems. But now, for the last years, there's been a shift so that the politicians thinks it's better to have an amalgamation process to merge the municipalities so that you can meet the tasks with your own capacity and not will be dependent on cooperation with other ones. So, what has been the result to meet the problem of scale by merging? And today, it is like 94 municipalities have made mutual decisions to merge. That number can be higher because even these weeks, some councils, they negotiate and perhaps they will merge to a new municipality. But this process have led to a reduction from 428 to 373 municipalities. That the number of the ones who wanted to merge is larger. It's about 150 and 160, but they did not get a willing partner to merge with. So so that's why it's 94 municipalities that have mutual decisions to merge. But that's not enough, thinks the national politicians, so they will use force in 13 cases so that it will lead to a reduction to 358 municipalities. And the answer of the question we will get later in the spring when the parliament will decide upon this new structure. Our position has been that the structural changes must be based on local processes. And it has been a large and huge and comprehensive involvement in the local processes. Perhaps the most comprehensive involvement on any time at one single issue in the local and regional history. The Local Government Boundaries Act states that inhabitants should be consulted before the municipal councils make resolutions concerning potential mergers. And that can be by referendums, opinion polls, meetings, or similar activities. Many municipalities choose to use surveys and others wanted to use referendum. and some used both of it. And the result is that 229 municipalities actually had surveys, and that was to find out what do people think about the problem of scale. Should we continue by cooperate with other ones, or should we merge with other ones, and in what direction? Which one do we think we should merge with? And in the result of it, we are researching on it now, but I'll guess that in half of these cases, people said yes to merge, and half they said no. And in 72 cases, the council overruled what was the people's choice. But interestingly, the most cases, it was an overrule from when people said yes, and then the council said no. But that's quite opposite from the referendum. And many chose to referendum later in the process when it was clearer which one to merge. And then the answer is easier. Is it yes or is it no? So that's why many wanted to have a referendum late in the process. And about half of the municipalities chose to have a referendum, 210 out of 428. And about half of them people said no to merge, and half said yes. And in 29 cases, the people's vote was overruled by the council. And here, in most cases, it was overruled from the people's no to the council's yes. So, the result is a slightly larger municipalities in Norway. If you look at the merging municipalities, we have an average going from 14,000 people to 36,000 people, and a median from 5 to 23,000. So quite significant change. But if you take the total picture, the average only moves from 12,000 to 14,600, and the median from 4,600 to 5,100, and that is not so much difference from what it is today. Also, at the regional level, it's structural reform. 6 counties made mutual decisions to merge. Then it moved from 19 to 16 counties. And here as well, it's a political agreement to go further. And here they will use force a little bit more. And they will go from 16 to 10 to 11 regions. And that will be decided this spring. So much for the structure. But why have the municipalities and the counties been successful so far? And the answer is that it all comes down to trust and confidence in the politicians. Trust is in political institutions is an essential component of well-functioning democracies. And the Norwegian mystery, the Norwegian welfare mystery is that local and regional authorities have been given more and more responsibility and more tasks, both from the national parliament and from citizens, but without decline in the level of trust. And if you look in the United States and Europe, the popular trust in governments, in institutions, in political parties and politicians, that has been declining for decades. But that has not been the situation in Norway. So that is the mystery. Why? And to try to answer that question, I have to start with some basics, and that is the values of Norwegians. And one of the core values of Norwegians is freedom. Freedom from state override. It's a very strong value that touches the deepest notion of what local democracy means. But freedom from also affects freedom of underfunded reforms. So it's about money. And freedom from is therefore also strongly linked to a sense of bondage because of unrealistic expectations created through national politicians' promises on behalf of local politicians. But freedom too is another thing. And freedom too is primarily related to the freedom to prioritize in line with local political wishes. The main significance of the concept of liberty still seems to be the freedom to provide adequate services and freedom of local adaptation. And if you ask, we have asked people, politicians and staff and citizens without that not our politicians themselves. And for the non-elected citizens, the freedom too is closely related to that it is possible to influence the provision of services, both politically and in contact with service agencies and personnel. And this is crucial. And it's also interesting to note that this interest rarely emerges as a consumer orientation, but it is an expression of ownership of municipal public goods, and that people feel that they are a part of to manage the relevant knowledge, to manage the resources. This is not them, it's us. So we are part of it. We are part of our municipality. So we need to control it from below. And that is very important value for the citizens in Norway. So that leads us to the explanation. It's about sufficient money, freedom from underfunded reforms, freedom to meet local prioritizations, and it's also autonomy. It's the municipality's responsibility is strongly linked to local knowledge, but this responsibility can only be realized if the municipality has a real opportunity to prioritize independence in accordance to that local knowledge. So autonomy is important, and that is what the national parliament and the central government can help us with, to get enough sufficient economy and also give sufficient autonomy. But also it's the importance of for the people to control the local authorities, to control the politics. Because the municipality is not perceived as a completely remote and inaccessible bureaucratic system. The municipality is accessible and it's possible to control, or at least influence and to correct. And in Norway, many people are almost uncompromisingly committed to the right and ability to influence decisions. And what people fear more than anything else is distance and inaccessibility. It isn't like that people are running to the town hall and to say, I want to participate. But if they feel that they don't have the ability to participate in what's important for them, then they will let their voices heard. It's classic. It's loyalty, voice, and exit. So we have to have a system that the voices can be listened to. In other case, people will exit. So, but in between what the national governments can do and what the people can control from below, we have this political added value that local politicians can add to the system of trust. And the local elected officials have an opportunity to refute criticism in the public sphere, but also in direct conversation with citizens. And they can explain the dilemmas that everybody can't get everything. We don't have resources to meet everybody's needs. We have to make prioritization. And to meet people and to express this and to talk with people, they get understanding by the citizens. We know each other because we have 11,000 politicians. We know each other. My wife is a politician, so I can go I don't have to go to town hall. I can take it at breakfast. So it's easy. And my friends are politicians. I was a councillor myself in the 90s. So we are all political. So that's a part of us. But also, it's a very interesting thing is that local political conflicts also have a special ability to inspire confidence. And this is quite interesting, because in Norway, we don't have position and opposition. We have a coalition. In the executive board, the point is that every interest in the society should be at the board that makes decisions. So everyone will be heard at the table. That's important. And that means also that we have shifting majorities on different issues. So you're not stuck with one party and some parties. We shift interests. And also, when you decide something, the responsibility is not for some people in a long time from now on. It's concrete, it's right here and it's right now. And the responsibility is for the people you know. It's for the family, it's for your friends, it's for the people you meet at the grocery. So it's people you actually know. We know each other. We recognize each other. And in this way, when you have conflicts, the conflicts, they are rarely fundamentalistic. So that means that you know it will be conflicts, but that is professional in some sort of way. So it's nothing to be scared of. Political conflict is normal. That's what we do. We meet at Rotary, and that we meet at parent cooperation and everything. But when we meet at the table to make prioritizations, then we are competitors. But that's okay. We know. So we build. It's a form of building trust to each other, that we know the role that everyone has in different situations. So I will say a little bit about what KS do. Of course, we are a spokesperson to secure local freedom. This is our board. We work with government, we work with parliament, and we have dialogue with our members and documentation, our own experts. We have a research institute, but I will not go into this. I will go into what we do together with our members. Our starting point is normative. We have to have a platform. What is good local democracy? If we don't have we don't know what to achieve. We must agree upon what to achieve. Good local democracy has been discussed for 2,500 years, and it still will be discussed. So we asked several experts, different experts, to help us with what is good local democracy. And then we put together a platform with some key elements. And perhaps most important is that citizens feel well represented, and that it's the councillors that set the agenda, and that the municipality delivers what it promises. And the last point is that democracy is not only political processes, it's also political outcome. If you don't deliver, people will not trust the governments. So you have to deliver. And then we moved from normative to the empirical. Well, how is it? And then we have developed some standards and indicators. We have developed a practical tool so that the local municipalities themselves can ask their citizens, how do you evaluate our local democracy in our municipality? And this also, the results is in a national open database. And these days we are introducing the new survey. 20 municipalities so far have said yes, we will. And we have the capacity to do it for 100 municipalities. And then we check the reliability, the accountability, the efficiency, and also if people feel that the municipality is close to the citizens. And most satisfied, the people are most satisfied with the efficiency and in what the council actually delivers. But they are least satisfied with the possibility to influence. And that is very important. Because if the possibility to influence is at the core of building trust, and the citizens are not satisfied with that, then we have to really do something to have better connections with our citizens. And then we do some analysis. Here is just one example. When we have said all of the data on what is the evaluation that the citizens have on each municipality, compared to all other statistics that we have access to, then we got some interesting results. One result, and the easy way out, is just to remember three things. Because if you have a high level of trust, then you don't have to organize so much. Then all things go smooth. So it comes down to three key elements. It's culture and structure and information. And it's the political culture. If you have a culture that have a high degree of mutual trust between the municipal councilors, that is very important. And that makes the communication between stakeholders more smooth, gives room for good discussions and good decisions, and makes the implementation easier. And the role of the mayor is mentioned as particularly important, because people watch the political debates, and if they feel that this is nonsense or they don't deal with each other in a proper way, they will think that the democracy is not so good. So, and that you can do yourself. You can be an all right person also being a politician. So that will influence on how people view the local politics. And also, it's openness, transparency, and inclusion of political parties that are in opposition. That are also elements that create mutual trust. Structure. Our experience indicates that the importance of clear and formal organizational structure, and more important, the importance of clear lines of responsibility. So knowing who are responsible for what at different stages in the decision-making process is important to the citizens' evaluation of efficiency, accountability, and reliability. Information. Making arrangements for informing citizens about decision-making processes, decisions voted on, the arguments for or against different alternative decisions, as well as information about the implementation of decisions that may enhance citizens' view on local democratic governance. So, if you just keep on building a culture of trust and make sure that the structure have clear lines of responsibility and that you have a lot of information to the citizens, then you will have a democracy that are better off than today. What we do is that we feed this back to the local councillors. We have a councillor training program in the first years of the mandate period, and we call the program Trust, and that says it all. It all comes down to trust. 2 days plus 1 day follow-up, 2 days in the start of the period. Then we focus on the political leadership, how it is to represent citizens, how to lead the political community, how to control the administration, and how to secure that the inhabitants get results from the municipality. We also give advice in different like financial compensation, because it's up to the councils and counties themselves to decide the compensation that the councillors get. And it's important for us that it is compensation and not wages as the staff because it's something else. You are not a staff, you are not a part of the administration, you are something else, you are a politician, and you get compensation for it. Mayors are the only one that are full-time politicians. That means in the larger cities there might be more. What they get is comparable to the national politicians, and that will be about £90,000 a year. Deputy mayors are part-time compensated, and other elected officials, they get between 10 and 100 pounds per meeting. But the ones that are group leaders or committee leaders, they get more paid. But it's modest. So the thinking is that this is something you do in addition to the ordinary work, the ordinary life. So we get some compensation for it. If it takes so much time that you have to get that you can't work full time, then you get compensation for it. So it's not nobody become a politician because of the money. We have asked the people why being a candidate for the council, and they say that it is because we want to participating on making a better society. Some people want to control the administration, but and some think about it's a first step at the political career. But the overall answer is that we feel it's our turn, it's my turn to participate in building this place where I live as a better place for me and my dearest and nearest. Other things. We have a hotline for service for advice and consultation for all the politicians and the chief executives. And they 4 or 5 calls every day on different things, but we try to help, and that means listening mostly. We also focus on political leadership, participation in and between elections. We support volunteerism, and we have an extensive toolbook on ethics. And here's a picture of the Committee on Ethics in the local government sector. It's led by a former minister and governor, county governor, we call it, and also mayors and professionals and Transparency International. So that is well, they are some kind of watchdog on the ethics in the municipal sector. And we also cooperate with Transparency International on several tools to protect the municipality. So here is an example, Anti-Corruption Handbook. But when it comes to the future, the years ahead, I think that the major challenge for us is to avoid, and for perhaps other countries to combat, the growing disconnect between the people and the ones that represent them. That means we have to be better to respond to the people's hankering to be heard, to be represented, and to have their views taken seriously. Because we know that the citizens in Norway, at least, are very concerned that there are independent local bodies. That means relatively autonomous, people-controlled municipalities that is possible to get in touch with and attempt to hold accountable in relation to genuinely local political priorities. So what we have put on the agenda for the years to come is to develop a more inclusive democracy. And that calls upon the national political leaders to actually decentralize responsibility and power to the local and regional authorities. And it also calls upon local politicians to exercise leadership, and that will be a more inclusive political style of leadership. But I'm sure that together, the national and the local politicians will be able to develop and build a more inclusive societies, and also to develop a more inclusive democracy. So that is what I was thinking of letting you know. So thank you for listening.
Thanks very much indeed, Frode. There was a sort of bit of a communal sigh going on in our corner here when you were talking about the kind of just get the trust right and everything else follows. But this now is a moment to bring in David O'Neill. Some of you may know that COSLA actually set up a commission on strengthening local democracy, which did a very thorough job of consulting right the way around Scotland, and came up with a report which was possibly unfortunately timed around April 2014, when folk were kind of busy on other things actually, that suggested that around 100 councils might be a minimum for what would really work in Scotland. So COSLA have already sort of put their head over the parapet really quite strongly under David's leadership. So very delighted to have him here tonight to sort of respond to what he's hearing from Frode, or say whatever he likes. So please welcome David.
Thanks, Leslie. I think I will restrict myself to responding to what Frode has said. I say what I like. My chief executive will come and push me away. Thank you, Frode, for showing just how different things are in Norway, and it's fairly obvious that the differences are very substantial. I do want to take a step back from my day-to-day role as president of COSLA and think what this might mean for how we do democracy here in Scotland. I've been passionate about this as a councillor for quite some time, 37 years. I was only 12 when I first got elected. I lied about my age. And why am I passionate about it? Because local democracy can transform participation in decision making. It can tackle the huge costs of inequality that still hold back too many people. And as we've just heard, if that sounds too good to be true, it's an opportunity to enjoy the benefits that our neighbours in Europe have had for generations. Bizarrely here, it's an opportunity that we've turned our back on in Scotland and across the UK. Despite us talking about devolution in Scotland, we remain a very centralised democracy, both Scotland and the UK. As I was listening to Frode, one thing came across really clearly. In the system he describes, there's a real sense that democratic power belongs to communities, and that those communities are empowering institutions to work on their behalf. The truth is that for 50 years, government, and I mean local and national government, and all the political parties here in the UK has often thought the other way. We believe that bigger is better, and that taking things to the centre is the only way to get things done. And that's a criticism that I lay not simply at the door of national politicians, also at the door of local politicians. My previous role was as the leader of North Ayrshire Council, a position which I held for 13 years. And I also took things to the centre. If things were not working in North Ayrshire, I said bring it to the centre and we will run it from the centre and make it work. We have generations of people involved in the public sector in the UK and in Scotland who have only experienced, if it's not working, make it bigger, bring it to the centre. The truth is that we believed that bigger is better, taking things to the centre was the only way to get done, and we need to change that. So 2 years ago, as has already been said, we decided to explore what was going on, and we convened an independent commission to examine the evidence and start a discussion about what local democracy in Scotland could look like. And what was the motivation for that? The motivation was that we looked at information that was coming from across Europe, across the developed world, and we saw that these places were doing better than we were. They were doing better in health inequalities, they were doing better in wealth inequalities. So we set up our commission, we had an open conversation with thousands of people across Scotland, the UK and Europe, and all of it is available online. It's on Netflix if anybody's that sad that they want to go and look at it. And what did we find? Firstly, as I've already said, Scotland is one of the most centralised countries in Europe. We have fewer elected representatives who represent larger populations. We have much larger councils that represent much bigger populations and geographic areas. I shall use my own council as an example. North Ayrshire has a population of 138,000 people. That's represented by 30 elected members, 30 councillors. Some of those councillors, like the ward I represent, I can stand in the middle of my ward, it's the town of Irvine, I can walk 15 minutes in any direction and I will get to the end of the ward, I will get to the ward boundary. Take another councillor who represents in part the island of Arran, which is half the landmass of North Ayrshire, and it's only a third of the population of that councillor's ward. Vastly different. Go to the Highlands. We heard the Highlands get mentioned earlier. You have councillors who could not drive for 15 hours and get to the edge of their ward. The Highland Council area, geographically, has already been said, is the size of Belgium. Secondly, we found that despite huge investment, centralising things has not tackled key inequalities that we face as a country. Take life expectancy. I did say health inequality and wealth inequality. When I first became a councillor in 1980, a long time ago, I was shocked that the gap in life expectancy where I come from in Irvine to one of the wealthier communities was 14 years. And the community that had the shortest life expectancy is the community of Fullerton, which is where I come from, which maybe explains why I look a bit peely-lally. Now, despite the best efforts of central government and local government, Fullerton still remains with the shortest life expectancy in North Ayrshire. The community with the greatest life expectancy has actually moved a bit closer. It's in the neighbouring town. It's a community called Whithurst Park. And the life expectancy gap is now 24 years. That's frightening. We are a modern, developed Western democracy, allegedly. And we have a life gap of 24 years. And that's not the worst example throughout Scotland. And when you look at these things in a very small community-based statistics, you actually get right down into the nitty-gritty of it, and you can get figures which are even greater than that. So what does that mean? In some parts of Scotland, people can expect to live well into their 80s, while just a few streets away, many will be lucky to ever draw a pension. They don't worry about their pension. They'll never get one. It's not an issue for them. No one set out to create this situation. We have been trying to tackle it, but we've got the results wrong. The outcomes are wrong. So what we found was that participation in democracy has declined faster and further in Scotland as in other countries. So not only are we getting inequalities wrong, but we're also getting participation wrong. But when you think about it, it's not surprising. People feel they have little influence. Decisions are taken far away from where they live, and it's hard to understand the link between local priorities and local taxes. And what do I mean by that? Well, there's only about 15% of local government expenditure is raised through local taxation. By and large, the rest of it either comes from central government or through things like council house rents and charges for getting into leisure centres. But the amount of local taxation, therefore the amount of local democracy, is very, very small here in Scotland. It's equally important to say that this isn't about any single government. It's not about the SNP. My crowd did it as well. It's not about the Tories. It's about all of us. We have all done this. We have all been going down this road of centralisation for over 50 years. It seems to be something in our national psyche. But I want to say something positive too. There's never been a better time to fix this. After years of little or no discussion, local democracy and local empowerment are at last entering the political debate. All of the major political parties in Scotland are now talking about local democracy. helped, I hope, in some small way by the Commission in strengthening local democracy. That's down to the work of forums like this, and organisations like the Electoral Reform Society, and pioneers like the late Paddy Bort, who was mentioned earlier, who worked so hard for change. I never met Paddy, I wish I had done. I think it would have been a pleasure, and I'm sure we would have agreed on much. Now, I don't have an exact blueprint for change. It would actually have been very ironic for a National Commission on Local Democracy to dictate everything that should happen. That is rightly for local communities that are elected representatives to shape. They will not all look the same. We need to let go of previous thinking and accept that different circumstances need different local solutions. Edinburgh and Campbelltown are very different, so why try to treat them in the same way? And it can be messy. Even within council areas, they can be different. Again, I shall use North Ayrshire as an example. A population of 138,000, 5,000 of them live in Arran, which is half the land mass. We do not configure our services in Arran the same way as we configure our services in the mainland. 10 years ago, we built a new secondary school in the island of Arran. We built it for 300 pupils. We just opened a new secondary school in mainland North Ayrshire the turn of the year for 1,500 pupils. You deliver services, you design services to suit the communities that they're there to serve. It is not a one-size-fits-all approach. It has to be different, and it can be messy. Secondly, we need to get back to basics and remember that it's communities that empower governments, not governments that empower communities. So it's not enough for power to trickle down from government to councils to communities. And I'd like to see Scotland become local by default. Thirdly, it's not just about taking power from councils and giving them to communities. It's about devolving power right across the system. Scotland and the UK is unique because communities don't have a right to local self-government. And I'd like to see that right embedded in Scots law, just as our European neighbours have done. And we have asked the Scottish Government consistently over the last 5 years in my term as the President of COSLA to engage with the European Charter and local self-government, and they have refused to do so. Their first argument was, you need to have a written constitution in Scotland, and only by having a written constitution can you guarantee that. And to have a written constitution, you require an independent Scotland. Well, I don't buy that, and I'll tell you why I don't buy it. We do have a constitution here in the UK. It's not written, but there is a constitution. Custom and practice embodied within strong alternative bodies to government, the churches, the trade unions, Civic Scotland, all of these things come together to form the Constitution and through case law within the courts. Even so, the Scottish Government will not embrace the European Charter and local self-governance. Fourthly, we need a simpler, more transparent system. Scotland is not local by international standards, and we do need to turn that round. A good start is to reform public services to folk in local place, not organisational boundaries. We don't need to get tied up, actually, with how many local authorities there are, how many health boards there are. What we need to do is free these organisations to work with and for their communities to deliver at a community level. My own council uses designs its services along with the communities in 6 localities. And that is actually getting to the size which most European municipalities are dealing with. And we are doing that without having restructuring. But doing that only with local government services, frankly, isn't going to hack it. It needs to happen to the whole range of public services, all of them. And people often ask about money. Would it cost more? Well, let's remember that one-size-fits-all approach is inefficient. Let's remember that inequality costs all of us money. People who suffer the most from inequality, who require the most from services, and there's a rather unfortunate term that these individuals are called high tariff individuals, because they make great use of the criminal justice system, they make great use of the social justice, make great use of the health service, and there is a great deal of money spent on those individuals. If we could solve those problems of inequalities for those individuals, the entire society would be better off. Every single one of us would be better off if we could do that. That's why I want to see integrated locally and local accountability for what they do, and to be truly accountable to the communities that they're there to serve. We in Scotland raise very little of the money compared to what happens in Europe, and as I said, we only have one form of local taxation. When you go elsewhere in Europe, they have a basket of taxes. So what we get here when changes take place to the council tax, impact that causes mayhem and all sorts of arguments every time it happens. So if there was a basket of taxation, I'm sure that would help. And the fact that people could come to me as a local councillor and say that they wanted to see certain things getting done with suggestions about how that could be achieved financially, that would strengthen local democracy. If somebody comes to me just now and says, I want you to do something different, my response generally would be, well, what do you want me to stop so that I can do that? And that's not really a particularly helpful position to be in. We are seeing a move towards, and this is a difficult word to say, participatory budgeting, getting folk involved in the budgetary process. It is happening across the country, and that's good. But we can go much further, with councils raising more of the money they spend, and as I've said, a basket of taxes, including things like a local tourist tax. Now, if people come to Edinburgh and they're going to be spending anywhere between £50 and £200 a night on a hotel bedroom, you stick another pound on that, and it's neither here nor there. But that could make a difference to the local economy. And if there were other taxes, a sales tax, you name it, a big variation, and it doesn't have to be the same sort of taxation in Edinburgh as it would be in Orkney. Different markets, different circumstances, they should be allowed to design their own basket of taxes. There does, of course, need to be some sort of equalisation of resources across areas, because we do have areas which have very high levels of deprivation and therefore an inability to raise taxes, and other areas which are quite wealthy and have a great ability to raise taxes. Take Aberdeen as an example. Aberdeen is a very, very wealthy city. Aberdeen City Council continually complain that they're the poorest funded in Scotland per capita. You know, they're actually right. The reason that they're the poorest funded is because Aberdeen is a very wealthy place. But Aberdeen City Council cannot access that wealth. It cannot raise any income from it. It can only get the Scottish Government give it, and a very small percentage, around about 15%, that it gets from tax. So, we all know that powers between Europe and the UK and Scotland have been hotly contested. And we shouldn't just bolt any powers onto today's centralised framework. I mean, because of Brexit, things will come back to the UK. Some of that will come back to Scotland, and I would argue that some of it should come straight to local authorities and local communities. Crown Estate springs to mind. Opportunity to do that in a way inequalities, reductions in wealth inequalities. Now, I'm not pretending that will be easy. After all, most of us have only ever experienced the current way of working. But as Frode has shown us, across Europe, communities are benefiting from much stronger local democracy. and Scotland should be no different. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, David. I think "gone yourself" actually kind of seemed relevant there, which you'll understand.
Sorry?
It's a wee Scottish word. It means when somebody's really kind of in their flow and they're kind of totally saying interesting, controversial things. You say "gone yourself." It means go on yourself.
Okay, yes.
We like that.
Come on yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, go on yourself, the audience now. This is your shot. Lots of kind of questions in my mind, but that's not relevant. Let's have the ones that are in yours. And if you could, I know everybody's awfully shy and Scottish and possibly even from Edinburgh, given that we're here. But if you could overcome all of that and try to get to these microphones, if you just hit one of the pads on it, it actually allows everybody to hear you properly. Or we do have this microphone. Where is it? If folk are really stuck in against the wall. Yeah, right. Okay, so thoughts? Yep. Okay. Tor, and then where are we going next? The one that says speak.
Speak, oh yeah. That's easy. My name is Tor Justad in Norway, or Tor Justad, I'm better known as in Scotland. I have dual nationality, Norwegian and British, and I've lived here for 40 years at least, I think. I also happen to live in the same village as Marie in Strandheffer, which is the centre of the universe, of course, and we're very proud to be living there. I've also worked for a Norwegian local authority, and I've worked for a Scottish local authority. I've also organised 150 or so study visits by groups from Norway, including COS in the past. Many politicians, many local authority workers coming over to look at how the health service operates in Scotland, how the education service operates and so on. So it's not all a one-way process. They believe in Norway that they have things to learn from us in Scotland. But Frode spent quite a lot of time talking about the question of scale, and although it might seem a dull subject to many, and all the studies that have been done about the scale of local government and so on, I believe that that is the nub of the whole question. And one of the statements that Frode made, which I think stands out for me, is that we are all political. And I think that expression comes across when Norwegians visit Scotland. When they're talking about local democracy, people in their communities know their local politician. As has already been said, in Scotland, very often people have no idea. If you ask, even in our small village, if you were to ask somebody who is our local politician for Strandheffer, most people, my guess would be that they wouldn't know. So this central question of representation and knowing who your representatives are and that you're engaged and interested in what they're doing is missing from the Scottish system. And one of the few places where it actually perhaps works better is, I think it was the 70s when the three islands authorities were created, Shetland, Orkney and the Western Isles. If you go to Shetland, and I spent 9 years living in Shetland, which of course is closer to Norway than Scotland, some parts of it, and was also part of Norway up till 500 years ago. But if you go there, everybody knows their local politician, because you've got a small population, 23,000, and about 30 or so local members. So I think the scale is crucially important. Sadly, in Scotland, we're going the opposite way. We're going towards larger scale authorities. We're going for less politicians. And of course, all of this, which hasn't been mentioned a lot, is tied to finance. We actually are broke as a nation, both Scotland and the UK, and therefore we don't prioritise money, putting money into local government in the way that we should. So I think a lot to learn from Norway, but equally we are doing some things right part of the time. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. Actually, can I just fire a couple of questions at you about how you do things? Because there's sort of, for example, I did mention that one about directors of education, for example. I mean, this is often a fraught thing that's raised here. If you were to suddenly have very many more councils, you would have these officials who are very highly paid relatively here, and you would suddenly have hundreds more of them. How does that work? If you have a little municipality, like one of the ones up north that only has 2,000 people in it, do they have a director of education that's paid a lot of money?
Can I use this or this?
Either.
You don't need both so that we can
Both of
hear
them.
you. Yes.
I can hear you fine.
You can hear me. And the answer is yes and no and yes. But for us, we do not quite understand the discussion, because every municipality have their own responsibility. And some of them have the educational director on full-time, but some have on part-time, in combination with other tasks. In the small municipalities, when you don't look at school, but for example, in agriculture, in business, in culture, it's the same person that has the responsibility for different tasks.
So your director of education is also your director of agriculture?
Well, not perhaps that combination.
Okay.
But you can say in principle, yes. But the point is that you don't need a full-time director on each sector.
But do you need somebody who has responsibility within that small municipality?
No.
Even if it is,
Well,
will it be shared with 2, 3, 4?
in Norway, we have the responsibility is for the council, and it's up to the council to decide what kind of administration you want. And then it's up to the chief executive to organize its stuff. So it's you don't have to have a director on school. You don't have to have a director on agriculture. So, well, we solve the problems with the people we have and share responsibility for different tasks. And also the wage is not so high. I've heard some numbers, maybe here, not in this event, but earlier today. And I think, well, an average director in the municipality, perhaps 60 or 70,000 pound, and that will be quite less than the numbers I've heard in Scotland.
Quite less, as you put it. The other thing is, one should say that the Norwegian kroner is almost worth twice the kind of pounds, so actually that even takes further down effectively how much that pay packet is. Anyway, Andy, another man that usually fires questions in. Andy Whiteman, MSP.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Frode. It was very, very interesting. I just want to make 3 observations. I think the future of local democracy is a critical thing for this Parliament. We've got the time now to get it right. And no excuses, I don't think. I was in Norway a few years ago at a conference. At the time, the Scottish Government, 4 or 5 years ago, was centralising the fire and the rescue service into one for the whole country. And I asked the chief executive of the commune I was sitting next to at dinner, so you are responsible legally for providing fire and rescue services to your commune of 3,000 people in association with every commune in Norway. How do you do it? And he said, well, we cooperate, as you said. So you can correct me if I'm wrong in my interpretation, but he cooperated with all the communes all the way down to Lillehammer. And he also said that we just built a new tunnel through the mountains to the next commune. So they are now, we send our fire brigade through there because it's quicker than what they got before. So in other words, there's a strong degree, as you said, of cooperation. And I think this local, but cooperating very, very flexibly is the key to delivering good, accountable public services. Second, on finance. So just 2 hours ago, we passed this order in Parliament here, the Local Government Finance Scotland Order 2017, giving £9.3 billion to local government in Scotland. I don't want to pass this stuff. I don't think it's any of my business deciding how much money local government should be deciding itself how much tax it raises. We only control 12%, or local government only controls 12% of its own tax-raising powers. And even now, the government's introduced rate capping, which we laughed at under the Conservatives, saying you can only change your tax by 3%. And they have no statutory power to do that. It's not in this order. It's done by bribery. So if you don't obey that, this will get cut. which is no way to run local government. And finally, the European Charter of Local Self-Government was announced. This is the kind of Bible on the topic, and I'm introducing a Members' Bill to the Scottish Parliament to get that incorporated in Scots law, and I'm confident I'll be able to do that within the next 3 years.
Right. Okay. Frode, have you anything to say in response to that about especially where money comes from and the way that central government is perceived here to have a lot of controlling interest on how councils work?
Well, when it comes to economy and the distribution of income, it's very complex, and it's very different from country to country. Even between Norway and Sweden, it's very, very different. In Norway, it's not up to discussion to get more local income. We have, I think it's 12.43% that you can have in local taxation, and everybody is at the maximum. And you can't get more, but you can get have poverty tax. That would be it. Property tax. That is the local discussion. And the reason, I think, perhaps is Norway is the geography of Norway. So it's very political consensus that we have to have quite a lot of redistribution, so that the peripheral parts and municipalities also have the same possibility to deliver the services. So that is not so much up to discussion in Norway. It's more in Sweden, and I understand it's a very hot issue in Scotland. But I think perhaps it's a part of the geography. Yes, I think I will leave it the economic question. When it comes to the cooperation, most people are satisfied with how the municipality delivers the services. If it delivers by itself, if it delivers by their own companies, or if it delivers by cooperation or by intermunicipal companies, or if it's delivered by the market, people are satisfied. So the question is more that if the people feel that who they can held accountable for these services. But, well, people are satisfied.
Okay. David, do you want to say anything?
There's an awful lot I could say. First of all, I'll say to Andy, thanks Andy, gone yourself. I have never stood for election and said I want to keep everything the same. I am not an advocate for the status quo. However, there are some myths. There are no directors of education in Scotland get paid 150 grand a year, none at all. There's probably a couple of chief executives get that, but everyone else is much lower. If you did have a system where people were getting paid a great deal of money, I think Frode is absolutely right. You would set these organisations up in a way that suited the locality. You would not necessarily need to have one director of education per authority. You know, they could, and in some places services are shared as we speak right now. Scale is a very important thing, Tor. I take what you said, and you mentioned our island communities. I think it was the right thing to do in 1975 when they set up those authorities. But in 2007, I think they took a backward step with the introduction of the single transferable vote, which works very well in my community. You know, it's a tight town of 40,000 people with 2 wards, going to be 3 wards. You can do single transferable vote there. In the islands, a 3-member ward, it's almost impossible for people to move about those islands and to know who your local representative is. The islands, if they wish, should be allowed to have a ward with 1 elected member. It might be messy. Messy's good.
Can I just actually play my Paddy Bort card here, because I feel him in the room, and actually I've heard him intervene on this very subject so many times and at such incredible volume that I think I could kind of articulate some of his thoughts, which is there are just far too few councillors. Absolutely. That's why you end up getting ludicrous situations where, you know, you get, just as you describe, it doesn't really work on the islands. But I know Paddy at this point would very often come out with his own home state in Germany and say that in that single state there are more councillors than there are in the whole of Scotland. So, you know, our idea of what is enough councillors seems to be as kind of restricted as everything else. Can I just try a couple more quick questions on practical things before I take in some more questions from the audience? Councillors' pay, I just wanted to be clear about that. How much does an average councillor get paid then? Is it £10 to £100 per meeting?
Yes.
Right, with a meeting a month?
Well, 2 or 3 meetings a month.
Okay. Can someone do the maths quickly? Right, which is less than the 16 grand that we have? Yes. Is that partly because the councillors are released by their employers from work?
That might be. They have the right to be released from work for 12 days to participate in public services, but they don't have the right to get paid by their bosses. So that is why we have the compensation, so that you don't lose money.
Right, okay. But an average employer would expect to let somebody go away and be a councillor for 12 days a year?
Yes.
And are there lots of meetings in the evening because you're closer to home, or are they generally daytime?
It differs. Most, I will say, is in the evening.
Most are in the evening?
Yes.
See, this is what I'd noticed, because you can't have evening meetings when you have the kind of journey times that people have here. You have to have daytime meetings. That means you have to take time off work. And so it goes on. The disruption seems to be much bigger. Right, questions from the floor. And if there are no women, we'll just stop, okay? Right, so you, madam.
Just going back to an earlier point that was made about health inequalities in Scotland. Now, all the research that I know points out that health inequalities are mainly caused by income inequalities and other inequalities in society. So I wondered if you could explain how more local democracy will have an impact on health inequalities.
Thank you. I'm going to take a few going round. Was that microphone actually working? Because I must say I didn't hear anything happening. It's just for the folks back home, and hey, we value you, so that's fine. Right, the wee clump here, if we could just get in and about these folk.
Yeah, one question and a sort of bit of an observation. Do your local councils in Norway consist of party politicians, or are they generally independent? Because here the parties seem to go right the way down, even if not formally, to community council level. And in a wider sense, it seems that there's not a gap between us and Norway. There's an absolute chasm. And it's fine having more councillors, but that's only any of value if the councillors are good at their job and competent at what they do. And also if they're honest and above board. I think there's a great fear here that the power going to politicians almost in general is not well used and frequently abused. But it comes down in a lot of ways to the key of most things in the UK and Scotland is inequality. You can't raise money locally in the east of Glasgow. It has to, or in Fullerton, I'm sure, I don't particularly know Fullerton, whereas you can very easily do so in large. We're so unequal as a society, and we have a UK government that seems to act like a bizarro Robin Hood, which transfers money from the poor to the rich. So there's no general consensus, okay, we should help the poor. They might say there is, but I think most of us here know for a fact that there isn't.
Right. Okay, all very good points. I'm going to take these two other folk here, because that'll be mind-blowing enough. Aye?
Mine is quite a practical question. I've worked in the front line of public services for many years, and I'm interested to know, you talked about, Frode talked about trust and accountability. My impression and certainly experience of working in Scottish public services is that you are drowned by paperwork, and that is how you prove that you're accountable to people, to managers and to the government. I wonder how in Norway if that is a similar thing, or how you prove your accountability, or actually do you have to?
Yes, and last one for this little round.
I guess mine is semi-double-barrelled, so who are your councillors? You might have a lot more of them, but in terms of diversity, do you have young adult and midlife adults as councillors? You're hinting that they're working, so that's a good start to complement the retirees. Do you have women? Do you have young adults? Do you have ethnic minorities represented in your councils, or are they still quite homogenous? And also, do you have strategies for digital democracy and participatory democracy to engage particularly young and midlife adults who might not be in the shopping centre bumping into their local politician because they work too much and then they socialise too much? So do you have digital communications for engaging with your local democracy?
Yeah, worry not, folks. We're going to go round and have another round here, but there's too much detail in this to hold. Are you a kind of standing person, or are you all right there?
I'm all right.
Right, okay, go for it.
Yes. It's political parties, not individualists in the councils. But, it's always a but. But I think that most people vote for an individual more than perhaps a political party. But it's the parties that constitutes the lists. And when I say that, it's to make up the same point that you vote for the people that you trust and then you feel confidence in, and that you know will deliver something, and perhaps someone you know. And I think that is quite crucial, especially in smaller municipalities. That is the individual factor that weighs a lot. And also people in Norway, perhaps more than other countries, I don't know, but they can vote for one party at the council and another party at the county and a third party at the parliament, depending on what is at stake. So it's the parties, but also individuals. When it comes to paperwork, yes. I think that is one of the problems all over Europe, and I say that because we had the monitoring report on the local self-government in the 2 or 3 years ago, and they say that Norway is a good democracy, but there are some concerns. And one of the concerns in Norway, as in the rest of the Western Europe, is that the decentralization of power is being re-centralized. And that is that even if you got responsibility, you tighten it by saying that you need to follow these kind of procedures, you have to follow these kind of routines, you have to deliver the tasks in specific ways. And that leads to the paperwork, as you say, because the government can have a legally check if the municipalities do the tasks legally or not. And to be sure that you're not wrong, then you produce more documentation than you otherwise would have done. So we have a lot of research on these issues, but it's complex. Because when you go to the health care, then you need to have documentation, but because you have the responsibility for the people, and that is 24/7. And when another person comes on the watch, you have to know what have you got on medicine. So you have to document that you have done the right thing. Otherwise, it could be crucial for the people. But in the school sector, it's different. Then you have the responsibility for the children 6 hours a day. Then perhaps you don't need so much documentation. So it's different from different sectors. And when we ask also the staff, we got some different answers. When you go to school, then the teachers, they say it's too much documentation. So their need is like this. But when you go to the school leaders, they need some documentation. And the school owners, the councils, they need more. So here is this is the pyramid at school. But in health sector, it's opposite. The need for documentation is more at the staff, and less to the leaders, and less to the council. So it's different in different sectors. But we are, as an organization, well aware of the problem, and we work as an interest organization, and we cooperate with the central government in projects to make it to simplify the regulation. And then we also try to take part of the European Union's initiative that's called REFIT, which also is a system of looking through the legislation to simplify it without losing quality. The third thing, who are the councillors? I don't remember the number, but I think it is about 38 or 40% women, female. The young ones, well, it's less than the population. So, but we have studied, is it different? Do young people, are they, do they have other priorities than the older one? Because then we would like to see how can we get more young elected councillors. But the interesting answer is that they are interested in exactly the same as the older ones. They are, as the older ones, 2 out of 3, they will like to have a better society. They don't look it as a political career. They don't, perhaps school, but not much. They are just the same prioritization, the young ones as the other ones. But the crucial question you ask is, how can the representative system actually be well and really representative? So I think that in Norway, perhaps it's more need for, of course, young ones, but also for people from other countries to also have a place around the table where the actual decisions is made. We, as an organization, we have invited every year, and in the United Nations Migration Day, which is the 16th of December, then we invite every councillors with a foreign background to meet with the President of the Parliament and with the President of KS, and have some hours of experience exchange, and also meet the national politicians. So it's more tools also to listening in the different kind of population that we have in the municipalities. And digitalization, yes, it's important, and then there we are just starting to look into how can we have a more e-democracy. And here we work together with our European organization, CEMR, to participate in some expert groups to find out of these questions.
Right, there was a couple of questions there that I think were kind of heading David's way. The thing about health inequalities, the questioner was asking, is that not really more a function of kind of income or more national issues? And maybe also there was a point made by the gentleman there who seemed to be saying, sort of in a way, inequality perhaps acts as a brake on genuine local democracy, because it means that there's so much redistribution needed across boundaries. I mean, I can remember going to Norway and asking somebody to direct me to a local slum so that I could sort of get a sense of where equality was in Norway. And I never found it. Now, I know that there are areas that are difficult in some parts of Norway, but nothing like the kind of inequality we've got. So could you just comment on that briefly, David?
I've got a rather old-fashioned attitude to taxation, that you should be taxed on the basis of ability to pay, and you should have services delivered to you based on need. So I don't have any qualms about taxing those who have and redistributing it to those who have not. Do we really think that we would have the health inequalities that exist in Fullerton and in the East End of Glasgow if the people in Fullerton and the people in the East End of Glasgow were the decision makers? No, they would not tolerate dying 25 years sooner than the people who live a couple of miles down the road.
But David, supposing they were the tax base, the question is, if they are the local tax base and they are poor, then I can remember somebody saying about Sutherland that, you know, they desperately wanted to kind of join with anybody else. They would basically have them as a council, but because they were so poor, nobody wanted them.
Yep. So you will always need to have a degree of equalisation, with the wealthy areas contributing towards the poor areas. And there is a selfish reason for doing that, and I mentioned it earlier on. These individuals, rather unfortunate term, who are high tariff individuals, cost the whole of society an additional amount of money that would not need to get spent. See if we could avoid people getting into the criminal justice system, if we could avoid people taking decisions about their lifestyle which lead to onset of ill health at an early age, if we could deal with that, the whole of society would be better off. It would not be something that you could achieve overnight, but what we have been doing is the opposite of that and going in the other direction.
But to the lady's point, health inequalities, how do they arise from lack of local power?
Because the decision makers are not the people who are affected by the health inequalities. If you put the power into the communities where the health inequalities existed, they are not going to take decisions that say, I'm quite happy to die 25 years sooner than my neighbour a couple of miles down the road. They will take the decisions that are going to have a positive impact on them.
Okay, I'm taking a wee sweep round here. We've got Ivan, then the gentleman there, and then yourself. Right, we'll try to get round to the back as well. Okay, Ivan.
Yeah. I'll just plug this in. Does this work for your sound system? Okay. Ivan McKee, MSP. I had a question round about structure, and we're kind of talking about your 300 or 400 local authorities in Norway compared to the 32 councils in Scotland. But you also mentioned you've got, I think it was 15 or 16 counties as well. Which are obviously bigger than our local authorities. And then we do have another layer here, but we don't kind of talk about it because they haven't got any power and they haven't got any money, which is the community councils, which sound to be of a more similar size to your local authorities. So I suppose what I'm really interested in is finding out what functions are carried out at the county and what are carried out at your what you call your local government. Because really, to move to the Norwegian model, what we would be doing is taking large amounts of money and large amounts of responsibility from our local authorities and pushing them down to our community councils, which would actually get us closer to where you are, I think. So I'm very interested to understand what the split is between which of those two layers has which authority.
Righty, and could people just, if you're not near a mic, could you come forward? Yep. Oh, you've got one, great.
You seem to have maybe stolen my thunder a wee bit in relation to inequality, but nevertheless, I was going to ask a compare and contrast question. On the one hand, I have the impression that really Norway is a relatively affluent, but also relatively equitable and equitable society. And that in many ways allows, or has allowed, perhaps a purer form of democracy to evolve, to have many local municipalities, although I also notice that there are regional governments. So I anticipate that there are bound to be some tensions between regional governments and municipalities in terms of decision making. Nevertheless, I think that there is a form of local democracy in Norway that's embedded in the culture. Compare and contrast that with Scotland, and we were talking about inequalities. Greater Glasgow Health Board produced a report, I think it was called The Aftershock of Deindustrialisation. It was quite a significant report that was outlining the grotesque health inequalities that emanated from deindustrialisation, which really brings me to the issue of the fact that we have lived under a regime, I can only describe it as a regime, of neoliberal or neoclassical economics for the last 40 years. And that has generated enormous inequalities. Just this week, for example, apart from health, we had a debate. I'm going to need to tweak you back towards local, because we've got precisely 4 minutes left and another gentleman to hear. We had a debate, for example. We had Jordan Hill featured in the press recently saying how well they were doing in terms of education. These kinds of inequalities cannot easily be rectified through, as I think you were implying, going for smaller local units. And therefore I think there is this eternal tension between larger forms of local authority that perhaps are seen as maybe more able to address some of the issues I've talked about versus a more accountable form of local democracy. Although I do accept some of the points that David's making about if you could avoid a lot of these externalities, you would begin to address some of the issues he's talking about, and the costs would begin to come down. But it's predicated upon addressing really big inequality issues.
Right, thank you for that. You've gone yourself.
Yeah, I think my interest really is getting back to the concept of democracy and what is democracy and how do people feel they've got some control over their own lives through the people that represent them. And I suspect at the moment in Scotland we have a situation where very few people know, and very few people will know on the 4th of May, who they're voting for amongst the councillors. Okay, they have political tags attached to them, and some people may vote in a political way for the sort of party they think will best serve them. But I suspect in many instances that they are not then voting for the person that they would actually like to represent them. And it would be much better if they bumped into that person in the street or they met them in the supermarket, they had the opportunity to chat. The build-up of trust between the person who's representing and the people, I think that is immensely important. I suspect also that in most small communities in Scotland, they may feel that decisions are being taken so far away from them, they have no influence whatsoever, that they may have a category of concerns in their lives for which they believe there should be more immediate local services and that they know what's required by their communities. And I suspect, by and large, in that area, they do know what it is, where pedestrian crossings should be, what the traffic system should be, all sorts of things that they have knowledge about. But they're very wary of, say, the director of transport sitting miles away who doesn't understand their community. So I think that we may come up with something in Scotland which is not exactly... I'm very confused by the Norwegian pattern. I'm very confused by the Scandinavian pattern, because I don't really understand how money is generated to ensure that you have equality of provision across the country. How, with a population of 2,000, for instance, you can sort of guarantee there's a high school or whatever that is providing the service that's best serving your children. But I do think that there is something down the line here that we need to invent for ourselves, and certainly lots of lessons at that level of trust within the community and understanding of who your representatives are.
Okay, righty. So we got a question there about the functions, the difference between the municipal and county kind of functions. And actually, I think that was an interesting point at the end. Does a municipality of 2,000 have a high school of its own, or does it share it with several other people, just while we're at it? And the various other points that you've heard. Have you any thoughts, finally?
Yes, when it comes to the responsibilities, some of the responsibilities are mandated from the national parliament, and the municipalities, I will come to that, is responsible for kindergartens and primary and lower secondary schools, but the county for the upper secondary schools. When it comes to roads, the municipality have the municipal roads, and the counties have the county roads and the buses and the metros and the county ferries and boats. The municipalities have also the social support and child welfare. The counties have nothing at the health anymore, because the specialized health service is being nationalized. So the only thing that the counties have on health is dentist, but the central government wanted it to be to the municipalities, and that will create more cooperation. So that will be in an opposite direction than what they want with the merging process. So that is the difference. But what was the question you asked?
I can't remember.
No, but I have.
But to answer Ivan's point, then really it sounds like the municipalities are far more like doing the council's jobs here. They're a far closer match.
The level of community council.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to get our head around. Doing that level of money and that level of responsibility that what are currently our community councils. Like that's the which is right.
David's going to disagree with you in 30 seconds flat.
I think there is a basic misunderstanding there, Ivan, about, I think the word you used was layers of government. Some folk talk about tiers of government. I don't think that participative democracy and representative democracy are mutually exclusive. They are not in competition to each other. They are two sides of the same coin. You need to empower the entire system to make it work. You don't empower one bit by stripping the power away from another. And what we have seen over the course of the last 50 years is power getting centralised, particularly in Scotland, and at the risk of getting a soundbite in, there are too many people in this building who think they're running Scotland Regional Council.
Right, well on that cheerfully controversial note, we'll leave it. And I do think that's another great sort of thing from tonight. We are all political, indeed we are. Yeah. We're also organisational. Can I just thank the folk who have helped tonight? Lily, who's kind of pretty well put everything together in terms of getting everything organised. Marie, who has hosted us here in the Parliament tonight. Democracy Live, who've done the live streaming excellently. And there will be on the website, if you think somebody else should really see some of this, there'll be both the live stream and also a little 10-minute sort of TED video in which the overworked Frode, who really should be kind of completely comatose in about an hour after all of this, will be putting all his ideas into one zinging 10-minute film. So that'll be up within about the next week as well. And thanks very much indeed to David for being such a kind of feisty, kind of complimentary spirit. Rabble-rouser is the word I'm looking for, yes, to what we've heard here. So I hope this will kind of take things a bit further. I've no doubt we'll probably need to have another 4 meetings about small is beautiful in the Nordic countries before there are enough mechanics before our elected members to have the confidence to act. But let's hope that that's sooner rather than later. And just a final plug again for our little book here, McSmorgasbord. If you do want a copy, and this is really just hot off the press, it will be round in Hemma, and it would be great to see some support for that, because we did take a bit of a flyer on it. And it is indeed a testimony to the man we will never probably get the chance to mention again. But actually, just let's break with custom. Can we have a huge big round of applause for everybody here and Paddy Board? And I have a horrible feeling I've forgotten all of those thanks to thank our speaker, Frode.